let's go ahead and log into CUCM and take a look at some of the examples of some of these. So first of all, let's look at time of day partitions. And we'll just create a partition here called partition, let's call it PST. I hadn't really thought of a good name. Let's say PST Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And then we'll also create, or let's just use the example that we had, 8 to 12 Eastern, and then partition for PST, or GMT minus 8, for Monday through Friday, 9 to 17. So that's, according to Eastern time, that's 12 to really 20. Okay, or 8 p.m. Oops. So we'll create those two. We'll create the partitions, not that we really have to do those first. And now we'll come back to class of control and we'll create time periods. And we'll give this a time period called, let's just say Monday through Friday. And we'll say 8 to 12. So the time of day start is going to be 0800. Time of day end is going to be 1200. And we either want it to repeat every week from Monday through Friday, or else we could have it repeat every year on very particular dates, from those dates until another date, or from the date to the same date if we just want it for one date. We could even say things like Monday through Monday if we only wanted this to be a Monday rule. But we are saying Monday through Friday. Okay, so we have a time period there. Notice there is no time zone. We haven't added that yet. That's not done on the time period. So I'm just going to copy that time period and say Monday through Friday, 9 to 17. And we'll modify this to say 9 to, whoops, I passed it, 1700, again, Monday through Friday. So now we have these two time periods. And there's also one that is pre-configured and non-configurable called all the time. So now we're going to create, and actually let's just go ahead and create a few more like what we saw in that particular, let's do Saturday. I think it was 9 to, let's just say 17. So we'll do 9 a.m. to 1700. Repeat every week on Saturday through Saturday. And then we'll copy this, change the name to Sunday, and change the day from Sunday to Sunday. So now we've got 4. And what we're going to do is then come up and create our time schedule. And we see that we have a default of all the time. We're going to create one called Monday through Friday, 8 to 12, Saturday, 9 to 17. And we could give it a description. And so we're going to add our 8 to 12 and our Saturday to the selected time periods, and we'll press save. Again, notice that we're not specifying any time zone yet. We'll go ahead and press Sunday, change the name. And we will get rid of these and add our other two. Okay, so now we've got these 2 time schedules. Now we're going to go back to the we go. Back to the partitions that we just created. And what we're going to do is assign the time schedule for Monday through Friday, 9 to 17, and the Sunday, 9 to 17. And here's where we're going to specify the time zone. So the reason we do this on the time zone on the partition is so that we can be more granular or modular, really, and create time patterns or time periods and schedules that actually can be used for more than one time zone, because we're only specifying the time zone once we actually get to the partition where we assign the time schedule. So GMT minus 8 for, let's say, whoops, where is it? Pacific Standard Time 8 for GMT minus 8, and then Pacific Daylight Time, for instance. And then we can go back and say Eastern for our Eastern partition, and we'll use the, I think, yep, 8 to 12. Specified time zone is GMT minus 5 for, if I can find it here, here we go. We can either find the particular city if we want, or something generic like Eastern Standard Time and Eastern Daylight Time, GMT 5. And now we've set those partitions. So again, as soon as I place, go to a phone and use a directory number, or even just create a standalone unassigned directory number, whether it's a meet me pattern, whether it's a route pattern, whether it's a translation pattern, all of those are patterns or DNs, and they have a partition. Anything that has a partition, if I have given it this partition, then it has to be currently, and it doesn't matter whether it's, whether we're looking at it from the perspective of Eastern Time Zone, but if I look at it from the perspective of Eastern Time Zone, it has to be Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. until 1200 hours or 12 p.m. noon, or Saturday from 9 a.m. to 1700 hours, GMT minus 5. If it's in the other partition, it had to be from the perspective of GMT minus 8, had to be Monday through Friday, 9 a.m., which is, of course, 12 p.m. Eastern, until 1700 PST or PDT, and all day Sunday from 9 until 1700 PST. As long as it's during those times, then the partition is visible and the DN will be able to be dialed. If it's not during those times, then the partition will not be able to be dialed. Now, if we had, let's say, the example that we had earlier in the slides of 2 hunt pilots for 8,000, what would happen to the calls every time that a call came in and it wasn't, let's say it was Monday at 2300 hours Eastern, which is, 2000 hours or 8 p.m. Pacific. So it doesn't fall within either of the time periods, time schedules, or time periods for either of the partitions. Well, in that case, as we saw it, the user would get reorder tone. We might want to configure a third partition that's active all the time and place it lowest in the calling search space and have it be a catch-all, sort of a catch-all net. Maybe that would route calls to voicemail, maybe it would route them somewhere else. Regardless, it would be a DN that caught all the calls when they didn't match the equal DN match of 8,000 during the higher ordered visible or active partition times based on the time period or time schedule. Okay, taking a look at the example that we talked about for the hunt group call coverage, if I create a directory number and I simply say call forward all to, let's say, a pilot point, for instance, 8,000, and I send it to, whatever calling search space I know can get to that hunt pilot. Okay, so I call forward all, and then we go over to the hunt pilot. Okay, so we create a line group. Let's just actually go through and look at a line group. In fact, I actually already have one configured, so I'm just going to use that for voicemail. So first of all, I have my line group name, my ring no answer, that's what RNA, ring no answer, reversion timeout. So what ring no answer timeout should be used before the line group considers the call not to be answered. And this needs to be a shorter time than your selected DNs have for their ring no answer. Otherwise, you have the possibility, depending on service parameters, of the call actually forwarding into that user's voicemail box. Okay, so typically you want to have this as shorter than your shortest line group member has for their ring no answer. Then we have the distribution algorithm. Here's our find directory numbers to add to a line group. So what partition are they in? What does the directory number contain? Or do we just want to scroll through them if there's not that many? And we can select them by holding Command or Control if you're on a Mac, or I can select them using the Shift key to select a range and add to line group. But once we have the selected DNs, of course I can highlight those and bring them down to the removed DN and press save, and then they won't appear. But of the selected DNs, how do I want calls to be extended to them? Do I simply want it top down? Again, it will always try 1851 unless it's not available. Then it will try 1852. Or do I want it to be circular, which means always try 1851, then 1852, then 1851, then 1852, and continue? Do I want it to be longest idle? Which DN or which number has not had a call the most recent? Which one's been idle the longest? Or broadcast, send them to both at the same time. Okay, send all calls to both, ring all calls or all DNs simultaneously. Then I have hunt options. If there was no answer, or if there was busy, or if the phone was basically not registered, not available. 3 different options. If the phone, the first member, so let's say we're doing top down, which means we will always extend the call to 1851 first. If there is no answer, then we can try the next member and then go to the next group in the hunt list. So remember, we're at the line group level. We build line group, then we build hunt list, then we build hunt pilot. A hunt list can contain multiple line groups. A hunt pilot only points to one list. So here we're saying, should we go to the next member in this group? Then should we try the next group in the hunt list? Or should we try the next member, but if that member isn't available, do not go to the next group, in which case it goes back up to the hunt pilot and to its call forward no answer? Or should we not even try any of the remaining members in this group? We just go directly to the next group. Or should we stop hunting altogether and simply go back to the hunt pilot and report a call forward no answer, in which case the hunt pilot will take its call forward no answer setting? We have these options, all 4 of these options, for these 3 situations. And it doesn't necessarily have to be top down. It could be circular, and whichever particular phone happened to be, during the instance that the call is made, maybe we had 10 here and we're at call 7 and it turns up not available. At that instant, what do we want to do? Do we want to try the next member, then go to the next line group in the hunt list? Or try the next member, but then don't go to the next group, go back up to the hunt pilot and do essentially that would be a call forward busy, I believe. And then I should say, or do we want to skip the remaining members in this group and go directly to the next group in the hunt list? Or do we just want to stop hunting altogether and again, go back up to the hunt pilot? So let's go to our hunt list and take a look. So here we have one line group, and we could, again, have multiple. We have to specify what CUCM group is going to be utilized in terms of which subscribers, typically subscribers only, but subscriber publisher here in our small lab, will take and process the calls. should this hunt list be enabled? And is this particular hunt list, which in this case it is it used for voicemail? And we always want to remember to reset anything with the word list in its title should always be reset before usage. Then finally, we go up to the hunt pilot. And so this is where, just like every other route pattern or anything else, we have the ability to deal with calling party transformation, connected party, called party. Okay. We have AAR group settings that need to be filled out. And we also have the, so here's where we configure our hunt list. We're in a partition, whether it's a time of day partition or not. And here's where we have our ability to forward hunt no answer or forward hunt busy. Okay, so if we wanted to forward hunt no answer or busy to a specific destination, we would put in that destination DN and fill in the calling search space. If we wanted to use personal preference, we would tick these boxes, or we could tick one box just for busy and forward, to a specific destination for no answer if that's what we desired. And again, that would go back to, let's just say, a generic directory number. And that directory number that had originally done the forward all to the hunt pilot, the use personal preference would then come back to this original directory number that had done the forward all and say, what is the forward no coverage for internal or external set to? And of course, internal specifies, is the calling number something that we see as a pattern or DN that's registered to CUCM? If it's not something that we see, then we can use something alternate in terms of where we want to route it. Typically, these are the same thing. So maybe we wanted to route this call out to, 911. Bad idea in real life, but just as an example. Okay, and so we have to specify a calling search space that contains a partition that can match that pattern, whether it's a translation or route pattern, doesn't matter. Okay, and notice it automatically configures my external coverage for me as soon as I do internal. That's just out of, it's just kind of a nice thing. We can obviously change this to 91-206-501, 5555 or 5111. As long as the calling search space can get there. Okay, so that's hunt group call coverage as it pertains to use personal preference and even just the specifics of the hunt and line group. Taking a look at the client matter codes. First of all, we have client matter codes and forced authorization codes here, so let's go explore those. Fine, we'll see that we don't have any currently. So we'll create a simple client matter code, and we had some examples earlier of something like I had 555, and the description is personal calls. And I'll add a new one, which was, let's say, 347 was client 1. Add another one. 643 was client 2, and so on and so forth. You would add as many clients as you needed, their client matter code, and probably the name of them as a description. Then we would go up to our route patterns, and we would create a new route pattern. Let's say 9.at. Now we don't have any route filters yet, so we'll have to go specify some of those. We'll just keep this so that we can look at that. But we'd put it in a partition, whatever we wanted to put it in. Whoops. So let's say, let's say US dial local. And the numbering plan, we would select North American numbering plan if that's what we're using. That's the one that's installed in CUCM by default, but of course you can add other numbering plans. We'd specify the route filter, even though I don't have one yet, but we will go ahead and create one and come back here. I would then specify as the call classification, which by default is off net. First of all, we mentioned about overlap sending. Okay, if I need to send digit at a time from the phone through the route pattern out to the PSTN, PRI, I would tick this on the route pattern. Another place that we can allow, and notice that this grays out client matter code and forced authorization code. Why? Because if I'm sending the digits live, real time to the PSTN, then I obviously can't intervene as CUCM and put in the requirement for, another tone back to the phone to require a client matter code, because those client matter codes or forced authorization codes, if I did gather them, they would be sent out to the PSTN as well. So overlap sending, out of necessity of just the, way in which we described it, out of just the functionality, disables FACs and CMCs. Okay? And if we wanted to do overlap receiving from the ISDN, we would come here to system service parameters, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. We would, of course, choose our gateway or route list. We'll take a look at, or probably already have actually. Our route option, we can always route the pattern. That's the default. We can always block the pattern and choose what kind of enunciator message is played, or whether no error is played at all. It just simply hangs up on the calling party. But anyway, here we're going to route the pattern, and we're going to choose simply require client matter code. And that's simply it. This says the authorization code will not be activated. Press OK. That's because we didn't do forced authorization code. We did client matter code. Okay, please cancel and check. This is one of the default messages that comes up by default every time. Please cancel and check FAC if that's what you want to activate. Any updates to this route pattern also automatically update the associated route list or gateway if it's pointing directly to a gateway. Okay. Obviously, I think we've mentioned before, we can only point directly to a gateway if that gateway is not in a route group and therefore used by a route list. And if we are pointing directly to any given gateway, that gateway cannot be used by a route group or route list. So those are conversely, respectively, synonymous there. Okay, we can always do urgent priority if need be, typically for emergency services. So here we've required a client matter code. In the same way, we could require an forced authorization code. And notice, we actually can do both. Again, there are going to be even rarer situations where you would want to do both. But in the case where you did, you could have both. And they have a little bit of a different tone as to, what is the actual tone sent back to the calling phone to indicate which type of code needs to be dialed. And of course, you would train your users. You're always going to dial this code first, and then you'll dial this code if you were using both. But I've never seen anyone use both. Okay, so let's untick client matter code, and let's say require forced authorization code rather. So if we want to do forced authorization code, what we also have to provide is what is the authorization level for this particular pattern. If it's a local pattern, maybe US local dialing, maybe my authorization level is 10. I can have my authorization level be 101 if I want. I can get very granular, 102, 103, I can do whatever I want, but authorization level 10. So here I'm requiring an FAC, auth level 10. So I need to come create some forced authorization codes, of which I currently don't have any. So if I add new, authorization code name, let's say US local dialing, the authorization code, let's see, what did we use earlier? We said, I think 55 was the code, and the authorization level is 10. And maybe I would also add US national dialing, or long distance dialing, if I wanted to call it that. And the code was 2179 that we used with the level of 20. Okay. So if the user, back at this route pattern, if they dialed 9 something and the route filter, which we're going to define, matched it as local, and they know that they're dialing their code for all of their usage is long distance, and they know that they always dial 2179, and we can even give very specific codes to very specific people. Okay, so I can not just have a single code for all users that are dialing long distance, but I could have, you know, code 1 for Tom, and he's allowed to dial long distance. And as long as, you know, it can be a unique code, but as long as it is at the level of 20 or higher, but not quite international high, then he will be able to dial this because it's a 10 level and he has 20, or he would be able to dial national numbers, which we would obviously create a duplicate pattern, have a route filter that specified national or long distance, whatever you want to call it, and had the level of 20. Okay, so let's go take a look at the route filters. So as we go up to a route filter, we see that we don't have any by default. So we're going to create one based on the North American numbering plan. Okay, we can add other numbering plans. Okay, we have dial plan installer, and we do have the ability to add additional dialing plans or numbering plans. We're not going to do that now. We're just going to use the North American numbering plan. So we'll add a new one based on this numbering plan, and we'll call it US local dialing. So here we might say area code exists and Boolean and subscriber exists. Okay, that would be enough to specify that this is a, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said area code. Let me actually edit it, and let me say area code does not exist, rather. So area code does not exist, but subscriber exists. So this would be an example of 7-digit dialing. I might say US local 7 or 10-digit dialing. Now, obviously, if you have 7 and 10-digit dialing, or whatever country you happen to be creating or thinking about a dial plan in relation to, if it has multiple different variable length number plans or variable length dial plans, you very well may get into, and probably will get into, overlap dialing, where you need to have interdigit timeout. But I can also add a clause where I maybe say local area code exists, and I might specify what that local area code is. Or I might even say something like area code equals, and maybe 206 for Seattle, and subscriber exists. Okay, so within this clause, this right here, is a single clause. Oops, there we go. Let me get back to my pen drawing. Okay, so that's within a single clause. And within the single clause is the Boolean and. Both of these must be true. And here is clause number 2. But between the clauses, there is a Boolean or. So clause 1 must be true. Area code does not exist and subscriber does exist. Or area code does exist but equals what I happen to know as my local area code and subscriber exists. So I might want to change this to something like actual, not US local, but Seattle local 7 or 10-digit dialing. And Seattle's a bad example because it's a big enough city that you have to dial 10 digits. But if this were a small enough city, and again, you really don't want to match 7 and 10-digit dialing, but you never know. I've certainly had client requirements where you do. So you can use route filters to break this kind of information out. You can also just do the other way, which is obviously what we'll spend most of our discussion talking about, which is, throughout all the videos of learning for unified communications, which is just specifying the entire actual pattern in the pattern field. You'll find that route filters can seem to be really nice, and they are. They certainly have the ability. Whoops, I closed the wrong piece. Route filters have the ability to be very nice in some cases, but they also can, after you've actually done a deployment with them, you can see that they can sometimes be a bit of a pain. It just depends on, what you would like to really do more. And it doesn't look like I changed this. Oh, there we go. Seattle. Okay. One of the things is that all this information for the clause is stored within a single SQL cell inside of a table, and so there's a limit to the number of characters that can actually be used. So sometimes if you're trying to break out, let's say in the US we have what are called NPA NXX, and so an NPA would be basically your area or city code, and that's going to be XXX dash and then XXX. This is what's going to be called, so this is what's referred to as your NPA. And this is what's referred to as your NXX or your prefix. And then come the actual subscriber, or also actually referred to in the clause domain here of route filters as your office code. The office code would actually be your NXX, and then the subscriber would really be the last 4 digits. But so we probably should say area code and office code and subscriber exists, but so your subscriber digits. Okay, so in the US, a lot of times we have, as I have or will mention, which is not necessarily, in fact, very rarely the case in many of the other countries that I've worked with, we have overlaying city codes, in fact, we don't call them city codes at all. We call them area codes because they can define an area within a city. So for instance, 206 only defines a portion of Seattle, and there are other area codes that are used as well. And when we have to break these out, we call them breaking out NPA NXXs. And so if you've ever been tasked with breaking out NPA NXXs by usage of route filters, you can quickly find that you will quickly run out of actual character space because you'll have so many clauses, area code equals, or area code equals, or area code equals, but within the clauses, area code equals this, and and office code equals this, or area code equals this, and office code equals this, or area code equals this, and office code equals this. And sometimes you can actually quickly run out, depending on how many NXXs, that second set of 3 X's, or second set of 3 digits that you have that you need to break out to deal with if you have to dial 7 or 10 digits. And this is actually more so in the cities that are smaller, becoming bigger, that you run into this problem. But you can find that you will actually run out of the amount of characters allowed in a single database cell, and so therefore you have to create multiple route filters to deal with that NPA NXX overlay, and you assign those multiple route filters to multiple 9.at route patterns. Like we're going to go back and assign this route filter to our 9.at route pattern. And the way you deal with that is you simply create copy of your 9.at and you put it in a different partition. Can't put it in the same, that would be a shared line, and you can't have that for route pattern. So you put it in a different partition and you give both of those route patterns in the 2 different partitions the two different route filters that you've created that really create the aggregate overall picture that you want. And then you just be sure that you put both partitions in the calling search space. Doesn't really matter which one is higher because the route filter will differentiate between them. Okay, so the 9.at or at symbol specifies a numbering plan of some sort. North America by default installed, but you can install others, and presents the necessity of having a route filter in order to enumerate what that at symbol actually stands for. So we did mention about the, moving on, we mentioned about the overlap sending. Notice it's grayed out because I have require forced authorization code. As soon as I untick that, it becomes available. We talked about the call classification, on or off net, which can be specified at the pattern level. Also, if I have a gateway or trunk, let's say I have a gateway and I actually have one already with, let's just use, I have a few gateways here. Let's just use a PRI that I already have. On a gateway, I also have the ability to specify whether the information, the call should be classified as off-net or on-net. If I use system default, what that means is go back to where the classification was set earlier. So in other words, everything has to go through a route pattern in order to get to a gateway or trunk, whether it goes directly or whether it goes through a route list, route group, it has to go initially through a route pattern to get to a gateway or trunk. So if I set the call classification at the route pattern, then it's already been set, so use the system default, that is, use whatever it was already set as. However, I also have the ability to, and that can be really useful because there might be times when I want to have certain patterns make it look like as if it, this is an on-net call or keeping it on net, even though it actually is going off-net to the PSTN. That's not normal, but there are certain search situations where you might want to do that. Call classification on-net or off-net is recorded in the call detail records and the call management records. It's also useful for things like preventing toll fraud. There are service parameters that deal with off-net to off-net transfer blocking. So in other words, if a call comes from or in through a gateway and then based on the DNIS digits ultimately routes back out through a gateway to the PSTN, if those are classified as off-net and off-net, that would be an off-net to off-net reroute or forward, or if a user did it, a transfer. And we have the ability in system service parameters to block off-net to off-net transfers. We also have the ability to block conference calls when there are no more on-net parties connected. So for instance, maybe I'm trying to be devious and I want my wife, I wouldn't do this, but maybe I want my wife to be able to call her friends in the UK because she lived there for a couple of years. And so I want to bill it to my company's dime because I'm malicious, or I want to just not pay for it. And so that's equivalent of toll fraud. So I call up my wife on her mobile, and then I also call up her friend from the UK, and they're talking, and because I conference the three in, I do an ad hoc conference, and then I call her friend up from the UK and hit conference, so they're all conferenced together, and then I leave the conference. Okay, so I can go to system service parameters, and we'll just look here real quick, either pub or sub, under the call manager service. And we'll take a look. There's always context sensitive help based on the field name. If you click on any one of these field names, they bring up context sensitive help. You can always do a Control F to find information within the page, but you're only searching for the words that appear on this page, nothing in the HTML text box or drop downs, okay? Unless it happens to be the default. But if I click on one of these context sensitive help names, if I do a Control F find here, I'm actually able to find not only the default, but minimum, maximum, what units, and also not just the name of the field, but also the definition of it. So I can typically find a lot faster or more effectively what it is I'm looking for. So if I do off net, maybe it's off net. All right, let's do block. There we go. So I had to hit enter 3 times. Block, okay, so it was off net without any dash or space. So block off net to off net transfer. The default is false, it doesn't block it, but I can turn that to true. Okay, so let's search for off net. And here we go, use original call classification for transferred calls. Here we go, drop ad hoc conference. So I can either drop it never, when the conference controller, the person that set up the conference, leaves, or when no on-net parties remain in the conference to block toll fraud. The default is don't ever drop it, but this is a very, this is a very normal thing that I change this to for most of my consulting clients because they don't want this kind of toll fraud to occur. So there are good reasons for that, for having the off-net call classification besides just the call detail records, which are certainly very useful themselves. Another thing we dealt with was the overlap sending. So there's 3 main places we find it. First of all, always look under the main section that you're under. Here we're under a cluster-wide parameter, so if I change it on one server, it changes it on all. And it's for devices, specifically PRI and MGCP gateway devices. So first of all, I can discard non-in-band progress in overlap sending. So it determines whether the progress message received in an overlap sending state, the PRI is sending me 1 digit at a time, without in-band information, is discarded or reported by the call control via PRI or QSIG. Q-dot signaling is a form of a tunneling over top of PRI, a lot more enhancement to PRI, but it's typically used, in fact, almost exclusively used through integrations with other PBXs, not out to the PSTN. Okay, so overlap there. There's also the T304 timer, okay, for ISDN layer 3 for the user overlap sending. So this is basically the T302 timer, of course, is the interdigit timeout between phone keypad key presses. The default is 15,000 milliseconds or 15 seconds. The minimum I can have for interdigit timeout is 3 seconds, and the maximum is 75 seconds. T304 is almost like an interdigit timeout, but specifically for overlap sending. Oops. Okay, we already looked at this one. And then there's also the overlap receiving flag for PRIs. So is overlap receiving from a PSTN PRI supported? The default is true. It is supported. Okay, and then there's also the H225 T302 timer and H225 T304. So these are specific. If we take a scroll up to the section this was under, these are specific not just to device, which is what the T302 and T304 timers were set at, but to device H323. So device deals with skinny and SIP phones, and device H323 deals with H323 gateways or trunks. Okay, so we have the ability to do that there. And then also, if we're actually out at a iOS gateway, if I jump into global config mode and go to interface, let's say serial 00023, which is my D channel, I can specify things like ISDN. I can specify a lot of information, obviously, but ISDN, let's say overlap receiving. So simply specify whether it supports it or not. Enter. what the terminating character is, and what the T302 timer is. And currently I'm using a PRI NI, or national switch, and it tells me that overlap receiving is, I'm using a PRI 5ESS, and it's not supported on this switch type. So I would have to switch over to a switch type or convert my ISDN switch type to one that is supported. Okay, I could also deal with things such as ISDN sending complete. And this is something that's common in a number of other countries where there's actually a sending complete indicator sent in the outgoing setup message to let them know if we've sent all the digits to the PSTN, and typically deals with overlap sending receiving. Okay, and one other thing I wanted to look at back in CUCM, really two other things. One was a SIP route pattern, something we didn't really talk about too much, and one was the SIP dial rules. So we talked about the SIP dial rules. So let's go ahead and take a look at these, and we probably don't have any created yet. So if, again, these are for the SIP phones, if we wanted to basically create a dial plan that could be sent down to a phone, let's say in the case of a 7960 or 40, so that since they don't support KPML, so that we don't have to wait for interdigit timeout, or even just for newer phones that maybe we want to eschew the need for interdigit timeout with missed or received calls. Really with returning a call through call history. So missed, received calls, especially when they begin with a plus. And we'll talk about those actual types of patterns later. But, we're returning a call to a plus, and so therefore the translation or route pattern that has that matchable plus character has urgent priority ticked, and we are sending from a SIP KPML phone. So because of that, we want to eschew that need. So first of all, there's two different types of dial patterns, and they affect how we input the actual values or pattern matching in the dial rules that we're going to create. So unless you have a 7905 or 7912, then all of the others are going to be used here. 7940 or 7960 or other, which is really everything else. Okay, so almost always you'll be wanting this unless you happen to have these two phones. So we'll choose next. We'll give it a name. Maybe call it something like avoid call history return timeout, for instance. And we can have multiple patterns within this rule set. So let's say, first of all, we want to avoid call history return. And so we want to add pattern. We can add private line automatic ring down, but here we're just going to do add pattern. And this would be PLAR for a SIP phone. We know how to do PLAR for a skinny phone. I believe we've talked about that. If not, it's as simple as creating a translation pattern with no pattern. Okay, if I create, just on a quick aside, if I create a translation pattern that has no pattern here, but it has a pattern that actually matches whatever calling search space, and hopefully I've limited this calling search space to only a couple phones, maybe a shipping dock, loading dock phone, or an elevator type phone, a lift phone, so that whenever they go off hook, their calling search space matches this partition, so you don't want every phone matching it, and they don't enter any digits, so it immediately matches everything, which is nothing, and immediately routes the call to whatever called party mask you say, 2001. Okay, that's your private line automatic ring down for skinny phones. But back to SIP dial rules. Awesome, I knew this was going to happen as soon as I open another tab. There we go. Okay, so now I've got my individual pattern or button or timeout or user, but we'll probably use pattern and timeout the most. So maybe my pattern, I want it to match, and actually before we do any values here, let's go up to help for this page. to see specifically what pattern type matching I can use. So this will open up the help, which really is the administration guide. And we see that these phones all use KPML 49, 61, 70, 71, use the 79, 40, 60 other dial rules. Okay, the same apply for the newer phones as well. And here, if we come down to the values, let's see, where is there's a specific table. There we go. Pattern formats. So see the pattern formats topic. So we'll click there. A period. Okay, remember, this is going to be different than a translation pattern or a route pattern or a DN, how you would enter these normally in CUCM. Okay, it's going to be different. Why? Because it's following the RFC for these type of downloadable configurations or dial plans into the phone. Remember that SIP is an intelligent endpoint protocol, whereas Skinny is a client-server protocol. Skinny relies on having the server present. SIP doesn't rely on that. KPML sort of makes it almost like a Skinny phone in that regard, digit by digit, but otherwise it has the ability to have a completely independent or self-aware dial plan, and that's what we're doing. So period or dot matches any single digit, just like in iOS. Hyphen means more digits can be entered. Okay, so if this character is needed, it must apply at the end of a rule. This is basically specifying interdigit timeout, or in iOS, this would be a capital T for timeout. So wait for additional digits. So 1408 T5. Okay, we'll get to the T in a moment. By the way, this says T, set the T to N seconds. So it's saying 1408, wait for 5 seconds for interdigit timeout, and the dash says more characters can be entered. But it's showing you this is illegal because that dash has to appear at the end. So this would be a interdigit timeout, dash allowing more characters for the timeout value of 5 seconds. Okay, the pound or hash key, really the octothorpe to be technical, acts as a terminating key. But this termination can be applied only after matching this hit. So for instance, if we want to use hash as an actual dialable character, then we simply use hash. If we want to use asterisk as a DTMF dialable character, because they're obviously on our keypad, hash and asterisk, we can use both just by specifying hash or asterisk. Actually, I'm sorry, asterisk is one or more characters, so you can't use that. I apologize. And by the way, I think I was looking at the 7905 or 7912, so that is not what we would do. I think that is... Actually, you don't have to do anything like that. I think that's the one difference between the 7905/12 and the other phones. So my apologies. Let's look more at this. But the hash symbol acts as a terminating key. So in other words, if I do want to terminate interdigit timeout, which I don't have to specify like I just said you did, because on the newer phones at least, that is. In the older phones you do. Then I have to do the character greater than hash. If I wanted asterisk to be the terminating, the interdigit timeout terminating character, I would do greater than asterisk. Okay? If I just do an asterisk, that matches one or more characters. It's a wild card. If I want to actually dial the asterisk, then I escape it with a backslash. Okay? Just like you would do in normal programming languages. Comma can generate secondary dial tone. So, if you're configuring these, just take a look. So I want to specify a plus, which is actually not specified over here. Normally it would be part of a regular expression and we would have to escape it. But in this particular case, SIP dial rules, I do not have to. And I want any other character. So if it matches the string beginning with a plus and any other characters, then I want to immediately go ahead and forward that. So I've matched a pattern. Once I match a pattern, it will forward it on to CUCM. So there we go. Now I'm going to say all other calls. So I'm specifying my second rule within my overall rule set. This is my rule set. So notice what happens here. Here's my first pattern, which is a void call history return timeout, or maybe timeout. And it shows the pattern. It always adds another pattern field or another field that you can choose what to be. You know, maybe I would say timeout 0. So send it immediately. Maybe I wouldn't. I think for this one, I actually won't do anything. Let's just do save, or actually, yep, update failed because I did it wrong. Let me go back to it. What I should rather do is say delete this particular parameter. If I say delete the pattern, that's deleting. Let me just show you here. That was deleting this entire pattern within the rule set. Okay, so that's deleting all that. It's always going to give you an extra new blank space, partly as a visual separator and partly just in case you want to put any additional parameters in. But you don't have to fill it in. Obviously, if you do fill it in, it creates another one. Okay, but if I just want to create one of the individual parameters within that rule, within the overall rule set, then I will not click delete pattern. I will click delete parameter, say save, and I still have this empty pattern, but I just have my primary pattern plus, and then any additional characters. Go ahead and route that. For all other calls, I want asterisks. In fact, I actually would not want timeout on that last one, okay? Trust me, for returning plus missed calls, you do not want that. Here, what I do want is to say save. I can actually just click add new parameter or save. And I do want timeout 0. Whoops. Okay, so look at what it did here. At this point, a void call history return was on the top, and it brought it down to the bottom. And now all other calls is on the top for whatever reason. So all other calls, timeout 0 is what I actually want. I'll press save. Okay, so all other calls, the pattern is just anything. The timeout I want to be 0. So in other words, any other calls, I want to begin sending them immediately to CUCM, and it will basically use KPML for all regular calls. And KPML is a very nice thing. So I want to use KPML for all calls except for call history, returned calls that begin with a plus. So once I've created this rule, saved everything, then I would come over to my devices that were using the SIP protocol, such as, let's see, this 9971 that I have here. And I would scroll down to the protocol specific information section and the SIP dial rules, and I would apply those SIP dial rules. I would hit the apply config button, and that would apply the SIP dial rule. So one other thing deals with SIP route patterns. These are very simple. You've probably seen or heard talked about the ability to dial, and very common from applications, obviously not so easy currently from dial pads, although this will actually become more and more possible. But from third-party applications, or even Cisco applications, I should say, software, web-based applications, you have the ability to route to a domain. So let's say I can either use domain or IP address routing, but let's say if it's a domain, I say maybe ine.com. Maybe it's branch2, .ine.com. So essentially anything, the domain name that comes after the @. So I would route to msnow@branch2.ine.com, or maybe even just msnow@ine.com. And I need to have a partition, of course, and I'm going to send that off to a particular trunk. Okay, maybe it's a trunk connected to my branch 2 site or something like that. But whatever SIP trunk that I have set up, and on the other end of that SIP trunk is something that knows how to route at ine.com, whether I'm sending to msnow at ine.com and there's a resolver that can say, oh, msnow is DN4327, or even if I just send it to 4327 at ine.com, as long as 4327 can be either resolved or routed at the other end of that SIP trunk, then I can go ahead and have that as a routable trunk or a routable pattern so that I can do domain type dialing. Okay, this is only for the SIP protocol. So let's go ahead and just test these forced authorization code and client matter codes briefly. I've gone ahead and brought up corporate headquarter phone 1, and I've actually gone ahead and created a calling search space called test that I've applied to this phone, and there's no calling search space on the line. And the calling search space test only contains the partition PT PSTN Monday through Friday 9 to 1700. And actually this is now Seattle, local dialing only, because the route filter that we applied contains only Seattle dialing. So I've changed the partition to something that is currently active. Actually, let's change it to partition EST, so Eastern Standard Time, which it's not during these hours, even though it is Monday through Friday. And I've brought up this phone. Let's go ahead and just dial, well, first of all, 911. Actually, let me back up even a little bit more. There's nothing else in this partition. Okay, this is the only pattern that exists in the CUCM configuration in this partition. And let's go to the calling search space for test. And let's actually add both of those partitions that we created, those time of day partitions. So it doesn't really matter which one we put on top because remember, they don't have any overlaps in time period. Okay, so back at the route pattern, there's nothing else in this partition, EST, and there's nothing else in the partition for PST, Monday through Friday, 9 to 17, or this one, 8 to 12. Okay, this one is not active right now because it is currently, let's say, Eastern Time. It is 1521, 1500 hours, 21 minutes. So first off, even if this partition was active or visible, this 9.at specifies 9, which provides outside dial tone, and then at specifies the numbering plan and route filter, and this only, as we looked at, specifies Seattle 7 or 10-digit dialing. So what we're going to find is that we would not be able to dial something like 911 even if this partition were active. But currently, the partition being active, not active, we can't even dial Seattle 7 or 10-digit dialing. Okay, and actually my PSTN isn't set up for 7-digit dialing, but we can test 10-digit. So we'll go ahead and test 911, and we should get pretty much, let me just make sure this volume is up. Okay, we should get reorder tone right now, or the annunciator telling us that your call cannot be completed as dialed, and eventually reorder tone. Okay, so we can't do that. So now let's try dialing 9-206-501-5111. And again, the call cannot be completed right now because the route partition is not active. So let's change it to an active route partition. And I have to hit save twice because I open another tab. Okay, and I've actually gone ahead and added require forced authorization code and client matter code. So first off, let's make sure that we can't dial 911 still. We should only be able to dial. We should only be able to dial the @ where the @ matches the 7, or in this case, the only thing we have available on our PSTN 10-digit area code beginning with 206, so a local or Seattle area code. Okay, so let's change this back to 9-206-501-5111, which is a valid PSTN number. And we'll press dial. And we hear the beep beep, and as soon as the screen refreshes, we'll see enter authorization code. So we need to enter, and I didn't enter it in time, I was talking, so we'll dial the number again. Okay. After we enter the authorization code, which is going to be 2179, which is actually our national code, we certainly could do the local code as well, if I can remember what that was. Oh, 55, that's right. But after I enter my forced authorization code, I need to press the hash key to let it know that I'm done entering digits, because I can have variable length FAC codes, as we do. We have 55 for local and 2179 for national. So I'm going to dial the number. We hear the beep beep. You see the enter authorization code. I'm entering 2179 hash. And you heard the same beep beep, but now the screen shows enter CMC code, or client matter code. So I'm entering 555 for personal and then hash. And the display updates and the PSTN phone is ringing. So I can combine the two together. Like I said, I've never seen that done. But the nice thing is that although the tone is the same, it's been so long, honestly, since I've done this in practice that I thought the tone was different. But the tone is the same, but there is a display at the bottom that says whether it's a forced authorization or client matter code, and the FAC does come first, just as it's ordered on this page. Okay, so our route filter works, our @ symbol indicating the route filter and numbering plan works, our FACs work, our CMCs work, and our time of day partitions work.